Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Grounded Roots Healing. I'm Jason. I remain bedridden. My back is completely shot. Uh, it has improved a little bit, but unfortunately, it's not back to normal yet. I'm going to talk about something called autistic meltdowns and shutdowns today. I don't expect a lot of traction on this video, but it might. It'll help me clarify it in my mind as to what I believe it is, and maybe, some people who know me will have a better understanding. So, to that point, I've had one recently, essentially. It is the way autistic people express being completely overwhelmed. So, it tends to happen when we get to that point where the break point, which for us tends to be quite often, or can be anyway. And I'll explain. So tomorrow I'm supposed to go pick up our dog. We're getting another dog. We're all extremely excited about it. And I can't. I won't be able to. I have no way I can sit in the car that long. So that's unfortunate. It's disappointing. It's our first male dog, and it's my son's dream dog breed and the whole thing. So dogs bring joy, and I'd love nothing more than to have a little hobby farm in the middle of the woods with as many dogs as I choose and other animals, but that hasn't been in the cards. So we do the best we can, and we get way too many dogs for a very small house. Okay, so with autism, an autistic person, by definition, is a much more sensitive person, in my opinion. This is the crux of the issue. So we have differently wired brains. We think differently. We have much, much higher sensitivities to our external environment. So all of the senses you can think of, as well as, I believe, sixth senses and extrasensory detection is higher as well, which goes into the telepathy thing that I was talking about yesterday. Now, depending on which level you look at this, as I do believe we are in a simulation, and you can go really high and really low. You can look at this as a disorder down on the 3D level. As you go up the frequencies, you get to God, then it's just the way God made you, and so that you could enact the play that we're living down here on the planet. And you can even go higher than that, and that above God, everything is just simulated, and it's all a simulated reality. In which case, we're doing it for fun. Now, this gets a lot very esoteric, but in the end, you're living down here in this 3D world. Therefore, you have to interact in the world as if it is a disorder, unfortunately. And it's a disorder. It's not a disorder, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything wrong with us. I think it's just a different way of being. But irregardless, there's less of us, so the society functions in the way of everyone else, the way everyone else works. So with this way of functioning, when you get jammed into a society that is built not for you, not for your way of thinking or your emotional state, and then you pile on, well, I'll get to that in a second, but you end up getting traumatized just by living in this thing. You do things like autistic masking, which is exhausting. And many of us have been doing that for decades. before it was even realized what it was, or before we figured out what we were. So I've been aware that I'm autistic for a year and a half, and I'm 48. So it's been a entire lifetime of not being understood and getting essentially traumatized by society because of the way you act and the parting gifts that come with being autistic. So I talked about this in the 2 videos ago, and I talked about the telepathy and autism in the last video. So there's clearly something different about us. and not in a bad way. It's just misunderstood. This is the problem. It's all awareness. So in my instance, which is probably the best one to speak to, I didn't fit in because that's what happens. We don't think the same way. And when you try to integrate with other children who aren't autistic, it doesn't work. And then, so you start to build your own persona. Now, we all build personas, but you don't have any idea how deep this goes with autistic people. It's different. It's not, it's like saying everybody's a little bit on the spectrum. Nope. Sorry. You're not a little bit on the spectrum. You may have a trait or something that is similar to what an autistic person would have, but you're not. So you go out into this world, you're born into it, then you go out into it, and that's where the damage starts coming. Now, it can happen in a lot of forms, but if you are a highly sensitive person and you're inflicted in an environment just to begin with that is not, let's say, sensory appropriate for an autistic person, it hurts you. So I have misophonia, like all of these names just kills me. There's so many acronyms and so many labels on the things that you have, but essentially I have extremely sensitive hearing. So if I get put in an environment where it's really noisy and chaotic, it drains my energy to zero. Now this goes for things like, like I know a lot of people who have sensitivities to touch, so clothing. If they're forced to wear clothing that they're not comfortable in, or sit, maybe they get another parting gift, which is ADHD, which is quite common in autistic people. I don't have it, but if you do, and then you're forced to sit still. And then, I'm convinced we're supposed to be out in nature. That's essentially where we evolved, and it's where we fit in the best. But anyway, so you start getting damaged. Then things like abuse maybe happens. And the trauma runs deeper. It's as if we are easily traumatized. Because of how sensitive we are to everything, our outside environment traumatizes us easier than the average person. So then, it doesn't take very long, but you end up being in fight or flight mode. And you stay there. You stay there for the rest of your life. That's where I was. That's why I was using alcohol. That's why I was doing everything. I was miserable, and I was tortured by my mind because I was in fight or flight mode for 40 years. Non-stop. No wonder you don't sleep. It's insane. So, fight or flight mode, we have this thing called autistic meltdowns. So it's not a tantrum like a little kid throws. It's a point where you've reached the brake limit and you've triggered the fight or flight mode. And because we're so sensitive, that gets triggered easier in us. So it makes you irrational. It makes you lash out. It makes you just, the body wants to get out of the situation it's in. It wants the people who are attacking it, as it's perceived, to be out of its environment. So it does whatever it has to get them out of there. If that's say mean things or yell or slam things or get really angry, it's absolutely what happens. And that's why we're not doing it on purpose. It's a involuntary response that the body does to protect itself, because it's been traumatized its entire life and is continuing to be traumatized. And it's a bit of an issue. Now, if you go past the fight or flight, like a lot of people will leave the situation. Like I've often done that. I had to get out of the situation because it was just too much. Or I've gotten angry quite a bit in my life. But most of the people in my life, including myself, didn't understand this up to a year or 2 years ago. This was just dead, or me. This is how I acted. And then I got a label for it, even though, like I said, it's an involuntary response of this body-mind complex. So I'm not saying this to garner any sympathy. It's quite the opposite. Actually, I would prefer, I wish it wasn't like this, but I would much rather have some awareness so people understand that that's what's happening. And when it does happen, don't take it personally. You wouldn't do this with any other disorder or that we deem disorders. But for this one, it's so subtle, and people aren't aware of it, so then you do get stigmatized, let's say. Why is an adult acting like irrationally like that? And doesn't seem like something, and then you're just making that up to justify your behavior, would be another thing that someone might say. That's not happened to my life, but there certainly is a lack of understanding. Even it's hard to describe, and it happens on all autistic levels. There's 1, 2, and 3, and they all do it. We all do it. It's just overtly obvious in the higher levels. In this autism level 1 that I'm in the bracket I'm fitted into, let's say, I have been able to control it or mask and get myself out of the situation before I let that happen. But it has happened my whole life, where I've, under a stressful situation, I haven't been able to handle it, and things have gone sideways, let's say. And for that matter, my father, it's happened with him as well. So, and of course I blamed him back then too. So I'm no saint, but I understand what was happening now. So you can have this thing called autistic shutdown, which is the next level after autistic meltdown, and it's where you just go silent. You have no response, no emotion, no nothing. Now think of the fight or flight, or freeze or fawn, which is all, an automated response by the body. Well, that's what that is. It's freeze. So you're just comatose, essentially. I've had that happen as well, where you've just gone past the point where you just can't even react anymore. It's shut off. The brain shuts off. So hopefully that has cleared some stuff up for people, and they'll have a better understanding of, if you have someone like me in your life, blaming them for this stuff it's not doing anyone any good, because they literally cannot change what they're doing. On a, let's say, spiritual level, I think this will change. I think this will change for us in a very big way. So as I've done all year, I've healed a lot of that trauma, and I've made a lot of realizations about what is going on and what's triggering these events in my life, what's causing me to go into an autistic meltdown. And when you have all of this trauma and unhealed trauma, it's much, much easier. Let's say your fuse is shorter. It's much easier to get down to that level where you trigger one of these. And once you heal them, it becomes harder and harder to break you. And I believe eventually, when you reach enlightenment, it becomes impossible. And why do I believe that? Because I've said this before, but I've had 3 days where I was in that state, where I was absolutely unshakable. There was no autistic meltdowns. There never would be, because I understood how the system worked and I would not react. But as I make my way back to this, I'm convinced I am, there will be more of these. And I'm not the only autistic person on this planet, and I understand that not everybody's going to be awakening at the same speed. So the solution isn't for us to awaken so that you don't have to deal with this. It's to understand what's going on with us and to give us a bit of leeway, some grace, and some understanding, some awareness. So I think I'll leave it there. What was that? Wow. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. So like I always say, I hope this video finds you well. I love you all, and we'll see you tomorrow.